He wasn't supposed to still be waiting. Not after 3 nights. Not after the rain. But every morning at exactly 6:12 a.m., the dog was there, sitting at the rusted iron gate like time itself had forgotten how to move. The neighborhood on Cedar Ridge Lane was the kind of place where nothing unusual lasted long. Lawns were trimmed every Saturday, mail arrived like clockwork, and strangers didn't linger without notice. Yet this dog, large, sable-coated, unmistakably a German shepherd, had become something people whispered about but couldn't explain. He didn't bark. He didn't beg. He didn't wander. He just sat, facing the road, watching, as if someone was supposed to come back. Daniel Hayes first noticed him on a cold Tuesday morning, the kind where the air still carried the bite of late winter and your breath lingered just a second too long in front of your face. He had just moved into the house behind that gate 2 days prior, a quiet place with peeling white paint and a porch that creaked under memory more than weight. It wasn't much, but it was far enough from everything he wanted to forget. 42 years old, former U.S. Marine, the kind of man who carried silence like it was part of his uniform. He stepped outside with a mug of black coffee, boots settling into gravel, eyes scanning the yard out of habit more than curiosity. That's when he saw him. The dog sat perfectly still, muscles relaxed but alert, ears slightly forward, amber eyes locked on the empty stretch of road beyond the gate. Not the kind of look a stray gives. Not fear. Not hunger. Something else. Recognition without presence. Daniel took a few slow steps closer, the way you approach something that might disappear if you move too fast. The dog didn't flinch, didn't turn, just breathed, steady and patient, like he had all the time in the world. "You lost, buddy," Daniel muttered, voice low, almost swallowed by the morning air. No response, just a slight shift of the dog's chest as he inhaled, as if scenting something carried on a wind no one else could feel. The gate stood closed between them, metal bars cool and unmoving, a quiet line dividing two worlds that didn't quite understand each other. Daniel crouched slightly, studying the animal now, noticing details that didn't fit the story of abandonment. The coat, though weathered, was not neglected. The posture, disciplined, controlled. This wasn't a stray. This was a trained dog, a working dog, and yet no collar, no tag, no owner calling his name. Just that same stillness. Minutes passed. The sun climbed a little higher, casting thin gold light across the road, warming the frost just enough to make it shimmer. Somewhere down the block, a garage door opened. A car engine turned over. Life continued, but the dog didn't move. Not an inch. Daniel straightened slowly, something tight forming in his chest, a feeling he hadn't let himself acknowledge in years. He had seen that look before. On men. On nights that never quite ended. The look of someone waiting for something that should have already come. He took a step back, then another, watching the dog carefully. "All right," he said under his breath, more to himself than anything else. "You do your thing." But even as he turned toward the house, he could feel it. That quiet pull, like a thread stretched thin between the past and whatever was sitting just beyond that gate. And behind him, the dog remained, unmoving, watching the road, waiting for someone no one else could see. By the second day, people had started to notice. Not in the way they notice something urgent, but in the quiet, sideways glances reserved for things that do not quite belong. Mrs. Keller from across the street was the first to speak about it, her voice carrying over the low hum of a leaf blower as she stood by her mailbox, arms folded against the chill. "That dog has not moved since yesterday," she said, not to anyone in particular, but loud enough for the concern to settle into the air. Daniel heard her from the porch, though he did not look up right away. He had taken to watching the dog without appearing to watch, a habit formed long ago when attention could change outcomes. The morning had come again, pale light stretching across the pavement, and there he was. Same place, same posture, same fixed gaze toward the road that remained empty. Daniel had left a bowl of water by the gate sometime before sunrise, placing it just within reach, careful not to startle him. When he checked again, the water was untouched. Not spilled, not sniffed, just sitting there, as if it did not exist. That was when the unease settled deeper. Not hunger, not thirst. Something else was holding that animal in place. Around mid-morning, a white utility truck rolled slowly down the street, tires crunching lightly over loose gravel. The driver slowed near the gate, glancing at the dog with a puzzled expression before continuing on. Even the world passing by seemed to hesitate, just for a moment, in the presence of something it could not explain. Daniel stepped down from the porch and walked toward the fence line, stopping a few feet back. "You are not guarding this place," he said quietly, more certain now. "You are waiting." The dog's ears twitched, just slightly. Not enough to break posture, but enough to acknowledge the sound. It was the first reaction Daniel had seen. Small, almost nothing, but it was there. He felt it again, that thread pulling tighter, drawing something from deep inside him that he had spent years keeping buried. He had known men like this, not in form, but in spirit. Men who stayed at their posts long after the mission had ended. Not because they were told to, but because something inside them would not let go. A breeze moved through the trees, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and old wood. The gate gave a soft metallic creak as it shifted in the wind, and for just a fraction of a second, the dog leaned forward. Not a step, not a movement anyone else would notice. Just a subtle shift. Like anticipation, Daniel followed his line of sight down the road. Nothing. No cars. No footsteps. No figure emerging from the distance. And yet the dog remained poised, as if the absence itself meant something. Late in the afternoon, Daniel tried again. This time he brought food. Real food. He set it down beside the water, crouching low, speaking in the same calm tone he had used years ago in places far from here. "You cannot keep this up forever," he said. "Whatever you are waiting for, it is not coming the way you think." The dog did not look at him, did not acknowledge the offering, but his breathing changed, just slightly, deeper now, like he was holding on to something that refused to fade. The sun began to dip, shadows stretching long across the street, and one by one, porch lights flickered on. Life moved forward, as it always did. But at that gate, time stood still, and Daniel, standing there in the quiet, realized something he could not quite explain. The dog was not lost. He was not abandoned. He was exactly where he believed he needed to be. And somehow, that made it harder to walk away. That night, the temperature dropped to 39 degrees, and a thin fog crept in from the low fields beyond Cedar Ridge Lane, softening the edges of everything it touched. Streetlights hummed faintly overhead, casting pale circles on the asphalt, while the rest of the world seemed to sink into a quiet that felt almost deliberate. Daniel stood at the window inside his living room, the lights off behind him, watching through the glass like a man observing something he was not meant to interrupt. The dog was still there. Same place, same direction. The fog curled around his legs, dampening the fur along his chest, but he did not shift. Not even when a breeze cut through, carrying the cold with it. There was something unnatural about that kind of stillness. Not rigid, not forced, but chosen. Daniel checked the clock on the wall. 2:17 a.m. The numbers glowed faint red in the darkness, steady and indifferent. He had not meant to stay awake this late, but sleep had refused to come, circling just out of reach like a memory that would not settle. He rubbed his hand along his jaw, exhaling slowly, and that was when he saw it. The dog's head lifted, just slightly, ears forward now, alert in a way that had not been there all evening. His body leaned toward the gate, not crossing it, but pressing closer, as if something beyond it had finally arrived. Daniel's eyes narrowed, instinct taking over before thought could catch up. He stepped away from the window, moving through the house with quiet precision, boots in hand, avoiding the creak of old floorboards. By the time he reached the front door, the air outside had thickened, the fog heavier now, muting sound and distance alike. He stepped onto the porch, the wood cool beneath his feet, and paused, listening. At first, there was nothing. Just the distant hum of the highway miles away and the soft whisper of wind through bare branches. Then, faintly, almost too faint to trust, came a sound. Not a voice. Not footsteps. Something softer. A metallic rhythm, irregular but steady. Like something lightly striking against something else in motion. The dog let out a low breath. Not quite a growl. Not quite a whine. Recognition. Daniel moved closer to the gate, stopping a few feet behind the dog now, following his gaze into the fog. "You hear that too?" he murmured, voice barely above a whisper. The dog did not turn, but his tail gave the smallest movement, once, then still again. The sound came again, a faint clink, then silence, then another. Daniel scanned the road, eyes adjusting to the shifting light and shadow, searching for movement, for shape, for anything that matched the dog's certainty. But there was nothing there. Nothing human. Nothing visible. Just the empty stretch of road disappearing into white. And yet the dog leaned forward further, muscles tightening now, breath shallow, as if standing at the edge of something only he could see. Daniel felt it then. That same feeling he had known years ago, standing in places where logic stopped making sense and instinct took over. The sense that something unseen was passing through, brushing against the world just enough to leave a trace. He swallowed, the air suddenly heavier in his lungs. "All right," he said quietly, more steady than he felt. "Show me." The dog shifted his weight. Not away, but down. One step to the left, then another, paws pressing into the damp earth beside the gate, nose lowering to a single point near the base of the iron bars. He began to paw at the ground. Slow at first, then more deliberate. Dirt scraped softly against metal, the sound small but insistent in the silence. Daniel crouched beside him, watching closely now, every sense focused on that spot. The soil there was darker, slightly uneven, like it had been disturbed once and then forgotten. The dog did not stop. He kept digging, steady, precise, driven by something deeper than instinct. And as the first small clump of earth gave way, Daniel felt it. Not fear, not confusion, something else. The unmistakable sense that whatever lay beneath that gate had been waiting just as long as the dog had. The earth gave way slowly, reluctantly, as if it had held its secret for too long to release it easily. Daniel reached down with his bare hands, brushing aside the damp soil. The dog had loosened, fingers pressing into the cold ground until they struck something solid. Not rock, not root, metal. The dog froze the moment Daniel touched it, his body going completely still, breath held in a way that made the silence feel heavier. Daniel cleared more dirt away, revealing the edge of a small, weathered box, its surface worn and darkened by time. It was not large, maybe 8 inches across, just enough to be hidden without notice, just enough to be forgotten. Except it had not been forgotten. Not by the one who sat beside him. "Easy," Daniel murmured, though his voice felt distant to his own ears. He worked the box free, lifting it carefully from the earth, loose soil falling from its edges in soft, quiet taps. It was heavier than it looked. Not by much, but enough to suggest it carried more than emptiness. The dog lowered his head, nose hovering just above the lid, not touching it, just breathing it in like a memory he had never let go of. Daniel studied the box in the dim light, noticing the faint outline of a latch, rusted but intact. No markings, no labels, just something deliberately hidden and left behind. The metallic sound returned then, faint but unmistakable, and Daniel realized it was not coming from the road. It was coming from the box itself. A soft, irregular tapping, like something shifting inside with the smallest movement. He swallowed, thumb pressing against the latch. For a moment, he hesitated. Not from fear, but from the weight of knowing that whatever was inside had been waiting to be found. Then he lifted it. The latch gave with a quiet click, the sound sharper than it should have been in the stillness. Daniel opened the lid slowly. Inside, wrapped in a piece of faded cloth, lay a set of military dog tags and a small folded envelope, yellowed at the edges. The tags caught what little light there was, the metal dull but unmistakable. They swayed slightly as the box shifted, tapping softly against each other, the same sound that had carried through the fog. The dog exhaled, a long, steady breath, his posture softening for the first time since Daniel had seen him. Not relief. Not yet. Something closer to recognition fulfilled. Daniel lifted the tags carefully, turning them just enough to read. The name etched into the metal stopped him cold. His hand tightened slightly, breath catching in his chest as the past rose up faster than he could push it down. He knew that name. Not from a file. Not from a list. From memory. From a voice he had not heard in years. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, the weight of it settling in, pressing against something he had spent a long time trying to bury. The dog sat down beside him, finally lowering himself to the ground, but his eyes remained fixed on Daniel now, watching, waiting for something else. The envelope rested beneath the tags, thin and fragile, as if it had been handled carefully once and then never again. Daniel picked it up slowly, thumb brushing over the crease where it had been folded. There was no address on the outside. No stamp. Just a single name written in faded ink. His name. Daniel Hayes. The night seemed to hold its breath around him. The fog pressed closer, the streetlights dimming behind it, until the world felt smaller, quieter, reduced to the space between him, the dog, and what he now held in his hands. He did not open it right away. He could not. Because in that moment, he understood something the dog had known all along. This was not about waiting for someone to come back. This was about something that had never been delivered, and some part of it had been waiting for him to return. Daniel sat on the cold ground longer than he realized, the unopened envelope resting in his hand like something alive, something aware of the moment it had finally reached. The dog remained beside him, no longer facing the road, no longer holding that rigid, unbreakable line toward the distance. Now his attention had shifted, quiet but certain, anchored to Daniel, as if the waiting had changed direction. The fog had begun to thin, drifting slowly across the street in pale strands, revealing the familiar outlines of houses and fences, but nothing about the night felt familiar anymore. Daniel turned the envelope over once, then again, his thumb tracing the faded ink of his name. It was written in a hand he recognized, though the years had dulled the sharpness of memory. Still, it was there. The same careful strokes. The same quiet discipline in every letter. He exhaled slowly, a breath that carried more weight than air alone. "You kept this safe," he said, not looking at the dog but knowing he would understand. The German shepherd lowered his head slightly, a soft shift of posture that felt like agreement rather than instinct. Daniel broke the seal. The paper inside was thin, creased from time, but intact. He unfolded it carefully, the edges whispering against his fingers, and began to read. The words were simple. No dramatic language. No attempt to soften anything. Just honesty, written by someone who knew time might not allow for anything else. It spoke of unfinished things, of a promise that had been made and never fulfilled, of trust placed in the one person who had not been there when it mattered most. Daniel's jaw tightened, his eyes moving slower with each line, not because he could not read, but because he already knew what was coming. Not every word, but enough. The kind of knowing that does not come from logic, but from memory that never fully leaves. The letter did not accuse. It did not demand. It simply stated what had been left behind. A message meant to be delivered. A truth meant to be carried forward. And beneath it all, something quieter. Forgiveness. Not spoken directly, but present in the spaces between the words. Daniel lowered the paper slightly, staring at it without seeing for a moment, his thoughts drifting somewhere far beyond Cedar Ridge Lane. The night around him felt still again, but no longer empty. There was a presence now, not something visible, not something that could be explained, just a sense that whatever had been waiting had finally reached its destination. The dog shifted closer, his shoulder pressing lightly against Daniel's arm, not seeking attention, not asking for anything, just there. Steady, grounded, real. Daniel folded the letter carefully, placing it back into the envelope with the same care it had been written with. His movements were slower now, deliberate, as if each action carried meaning he could not afford to overlook. He looked down at the dog, meeting his eyes fully for the first time. There was no urgency in them anymore. No searching, just quiet understanding. "He trusted you," Daniel said softly. "To stay." The dog blinked once, calm and certain. Daniel nodded, a small motion, but one that seemed to settle something deep within him. He looked back at the open gate, at the patch of earth now disturbed, at the place where waiting had lived for days, maybe longer. Then he stood, not abruptly, not with force, just a quiet rise, like a man finally accepting the weight he had been avoiding. The dog rose with him. No hesitation, no glance back toward the road. For the first time since Daniel had seen him, he turned away from the gate. And together, without a word, they stepped inside. The house felt different the moment they crossed the threshold, as if something unseen had shifted, making space for a presence that had finally found its way inside. Daniel closed the door slowly behind them, the soft click echoing faintly through the quiet rooms, and for a moment he just stood there, hand resting on the handle, listening. Not for sound, but for the absence of it. The kind of silence that no longer pressed against him, but settled gently, like something at peace. The dog stepped forward first, paws moving carefully across the worn wooden floor, each step deliberate but no longer bound by that invisible line that had held him at the gate. He paused near the center of the room, looking around, not with curiosity, but with a calm recognition, as if he understood that this was where the waiting ended. Daniel moved past him, setting the small metal box and the envelope down on the kitchen table, the overhead light casting a warm, steady glow across their surfaces. The dog tags rested beside it, quiet now, no longer tapping, no longer calling out through the night. Daniel exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair, the weight of everything settling deeper but no longer sharp. Just present. He pulled out a chair and sat, the wood creaking softly beneath him, and unfolded the letter again, not to reread every word, but to sit with what it had already said. Some truths did not need repetition. They simply needed to be accepted. The dog moved closer, lowering himself to the floor beside Daniel's chair, his body easing into the space as if he had always belonged there. No tension, no watchfulness, just stillness, the kind that comes after something long held has finally been released. Daniel glanced down at him, studying the way his chest rose and fell, steady now, no longer tied to something beyond reach. "You carried it all this time," he said quietly. "Longer than anyone should have to." The dog did not respond with movement, but there was something in the way he settled, a deeper stillness, that felt like an answer. Daniel leaned back slightly, eyes drifting toward the window where the first hint of dawn had begun to break, pale light pressing against the edges of the glass. The night had passed without him noticing, but that felt right. Some nights were not meant to be measured in hours, only in what they changed. He stood after a moment, taking the dog tags in his hand, feeling their weight, familiar and unfamiliar all at once. He walked to the front door and opened it again, the early morning air cool but softer now, carrying the scent of damp earth and something new beneath it. The gate stood open, the disturbed patch of ground visible in the quiet light, no longer a place of waiting, but a place that had given something back. Daniel stepped onto the porch, the dog rising and following without hesitation, his movement fluid, unburdened. Together, they walked to the gate, stopping just short of where the earth had been turned. Daniel knelt, placing the dog tags gently back into the box, along with the letter, his hands steady now, no longer uncertain. He covered it carefully, pressing the soil back into place, not to hide it, but to return it, to let it rest where it had waited. The dog stood beside him, watching, but not with urgency, not with expectation, just quiet presence. When Daniel finished, he rested his hand briefly against the ground, then stood, brushing the dirt from his palms. He looked down the road one last time, the empty stretch now just that. A road. Nothing more. No unanswered pull. No lingering weight. He turned back toward the house, and the dog turned with him, matching his step without pause. No glance behind. No hesitation. As they crossed back through the gate, the wind moved softly through the trees, carrying a faint metallic chime that no longer echoed, but faded into the morning like something finally at rest. Morning settled gently over Cedar Ridge Lane, not with the sharp urgency of a new day, but with a quiet unfolding, like something that had been holding its breath was finally exhaling. The light came in soft, filtered through thin clouds, brushing across the porch and slipping through the windows in long, pale stretches. Daniel stood in the kitchen, a fresh cup of coffee in his hand, watching the yard with a stillness that no longer felt heavy. The gate remained open, not forgotten, not neglected, just open, as if it no longer needed to hold anything back. The dog lay near the doorway, not blocking it, not guarding it, just resting with his head low and eyes half closed, listening to the world without searching it. There was a difference now, subtle, but unmistakable, the kind of difference you feel before you understand. Daniel took a slow sip, the warmth settling into him, grounding him in a way that had been missing for longer than he cared to admit. He glanced down at the dog. "You have a name?" he asked quietly, more out of habit than expectation. The dog's ears flicked once, then settled again. No answer, just presence. Daniel nodded slightly, as if that was enough. Names mattered, but not as much as what someone carried. The morning moved on. A car passed by. A neighbor waved from across the street, hesitant at first, then more certain when Daniel returned the gesture. Life resumed its familiar rhythm, but it felt different now, as if something unseen had shifted the balance just enough to be felt, but not explained. Daniel stepped outside, the gravel crunching beneath his boots, and paused near the gate. He looked down at the patch of earth where the box now rested again, undisturbed, returned to its place without weight or question. For a moment, he considered marking it. A stone, a cross, something visible. But the thought passed as quickly as it came. Not everything needed to be seen to be remembered. He exhaled slowly, then turned back toward the house. The dog rose and followed, not because he was called, but because there was no longer anything holding him there. Inside, the air felt warmer, not in temperature, but in presence. Daniel moved through the rooms with a quiet familiarity, as if the house had accepted him in a way it had not before. He stopped near the small shelf by the wall, where a few scattered items rested, remnants of a life still being unpacked. For a moment, he hesitated. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. A second set of dog tags. His own. He held them in his palm, the metal cool against his skin, the chain worn from years of movement and time. He stared at them for a long moment. The memories they carried no longer sharp, but not gone either. Just present. Then, without ceremony, he placed them on the shelf. Not hidden, not displayed, just set down. The dog watched from a few feet away, his gaze steady but calm, no urgency, no question. Daniel met his eyes briefly, then looked away, the smallest shift of something inside him settling into place. "We are not standing watch anymore," he said quietly. The words were simple, but they carried something deeper, something that had taken years to reach the surface. The dog blinked slowly, then turned and walked toward the living room, his movement easy, unburdened. Daniel followed a moment later, stepping into the space with a sense of quiet that no longer felt like absence. Outside, the gate remained open, the road beyond it just another stretch of pavement leading somewhere ordinary. And for the first time since he arrived, Daniel did not feel the need to look back. The day stretched forward with a quiet steadiness that Daniel had not felt in years, the kind of calm that did not ask for attention but stayed anyway, settling into the corners of the house like light that refused to leave. By late afternoon, the sky had cleared, a soft blue opening above Cedar Ridge Lane, and the air carried the faint warmth of something shifting toward spring. Daniel stood near the open window, sleeves rolled, letting the breeze move through the room, carrying with it the distant sounds of ordinary life. A lawn mower somewhere down the street. A screen door closing. Laughter, faint and unguarded. The dog rested nearby, stretched along the wooden floor, his body loose, no longer coiled with purpose, no longer listening for something beyond reach. It was the first time Daniel had seen him sleep. Not the shallow, alert kind of rest, but something deeper. The kind that trusted the world to stay still long enough to let go. Daniel watched him for a moment, then looked away, not wanting to interrupt something that felt earned. He moved through the house slowly, not searching, just noticing. The way the floor creaked in certain places. The way the light fell differently now that the windows were open. The way the silence no longer pressed against him, but moved with him. He paused near the front door, glancing out toward the gate. Still open, still quiet. No presence waiting there anymore. Just space. And for the first time, that space did not feel like something missing. It felt like something complete. He stepped outside, the air brushing against his skin, and walked down the short path toward the fence. The gravel shifted beneath his boots, a familiar sound now, grounded and real. When he reached the gate, he stopped, resting his hand lightly against the cool metal. Not holding it, not closing it, just touching it, as if acknowledging what had once stood there. He looked down the road again, out of habit more than need. It stretched ahead in both directions, unchanged, ordinary, leading to places that did not carry the weight they once might have. Daniel let out a slow breath, then turned away, walking back toward the house without hesitation. Behind him, the wind moved softly through the open space, brushing the gate just enough to let it shift. Not closed, not locked, just gently swinging inward, inch by inch, until it rested against its frame with the faintest sound. Not a barrier, not a boundary, just a door that no longer needed to stay open. Inside, the dog stirred, lifting his head slightly as Daniel stepped back in. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and something passed between them. Not a command, not a question, just understanding. The dog rose, stretching once, then walked past Daniel into the living room, his movement easy, unhurried, as if he had always belonged to this place. Daniel followed, pausing only once to glance back at the door, at the gate beyond it, now settled into stillness. Then he closed the door softly, the sound quiet but certain, and stepped forward into a space that no longer felt like something borrowed, but something his own. The following morning arrived without urgency, the kind of quiet dawn that did not announce itself, but simply appeared, soft light slipping through the curtains and settling across the floor in long, pale lines. Daniel woke before the alarm he no longer needed, his eyes opening to a stillness that felt unfamiliar in the best way. For a moment, he remained where he was, staring at the ceiling, listening. Not for what might be wrong, not for what might be missing, just listening to the absence of weight that had once followed him into every waking hour. Somewhere in the house, he could hear the slow, steady rhythm of breathing. The dog. Grounded. Present. Real. Daniel sat up slowly, swinging his feet onto the floor, the wood cool beneath his skin. He moved through the house without hurry, each step deliberate but unburdened, until he reached the living room. The dog was already awake, lying near the window where the morning light had found him, his head lifted slightly as Daniel entered. Their eyes met again, and this time there was something different in it. Not recognition, that had already been there. Not waiting, that had ended. This was something quieter. Belonging. Daniel gave a small nod, the kind of gesture that carried no command, only acknowledgement, and continued into the kitchen. He filled a bowl with water, then paused, adding food beside it, setting both down without ceremony. When he stepped back, the dog rose, not rushing, not hesitant, just moving forward with a calm certainty, lowering his head to drink for the first time since Daniel had known him. It was a small act. Simple. Ordinary. But Daniel felt it settle deep, like a final piece finding its place. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely, watching without staring, letting the moment pass without needing to hold on to it. Outside, the neighborhood had begun to wake. A delivery truck rolled slowly down the street. Somewhere, a radio played low, carried on the breeze through the open window. Life continued, steady and unremarkable, but Daniel noticed it now in a way he had not before. Not as background noise, as something he was part of again. After a while, the dog finished and stepped back, licking the last drops of water from his muzzle before turning toward Daniel, standing there quietly, as if waiting not for instruction, but for direction shared. Daniel pushed off the counter, grabbing his jacket from the chair. "Come on," he said softly, the words natural, unforced. The dog moved immediately, falling into step beside him as they walked toward the front door. Daniel opened it, the morning air greeting them with a gentle warmth, and they stepped outside. Together. The yard looked the same as it always had. The fence, the path, the gate now closed but not locked, resting lightly against its frame. Daniel paused there, hand resting briefly on the metal, then pushed it open with a quiet ease. This time, the motion felt different. Not like crossing a boundary, like stepping forward. They walked down the short stretch of road, side by side, the dog's pace matching Daniel's without effort, without correction. No leash, no command, just alignment. As they moved past the neighboring houses, a few people glanced their way, offering small nods, quiet greetings, nothing more than acknowledgement. Daniel returned them, each one simple, each one real. The road stretched ahead, not empty, not waiting, just open. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel did not feel like he was following something behind him. He was moving towards something in front of him. And beside him, the dog walked steady and sure, no longer guarding what had been, but walking into what was. They walked farther than Daniel expected, past the familiar stretch of Cedar Ridge Lane and onto a quieter road lined with tall oaks whose branches arched overhead like a slow, protective canopy. The sunlight filtered through the leaves in shifting patterns, casting moving shadows across the pavement, and the air carried the scent of earth warming under the late morning sun. The dog kept pace beside him, not pulling ahead, not lagging behind, just present in a way that felt natural, as if they had walked together like this for years instead of hours. Daniel noticed the rhythm of it. Step, breath, step, breath. The kind of rhythm that did not demand attention but grounded everything else around it. For a while, neither of them broke it. Then, as they reached a small bend in the road where a wooden bench overlooked a narrow stretch of open field, Daniel slowed. The grass beyond swayed gently in the breeze, a quiet, endless motion that did not need purpose to exist. He stepped off the pavement and sat down, elbows resting loosely on his knees, hands clasped together as he looked out over the field. The dog stopped beside him, standing for a moment as if deciding, then lowered himself onto the ground, settling at Daniel's side with the same calm certainty he had shown since leaving the gate. Behind, they stayed like that for a while. No urgency, no expectation, just presence shared between them and the space around them. Daniel let his gaze drift, not focusing on anything in particular, allowing the quiet to move through him instead of around him. It was a strange feeling, unfamiliar in its simplicity. For years, quiet had been something to brace against, something that allowed thoughts to rise too fast, too sharp. But now it felt different, softer, like something that no longer needed to be fought. He reached into his pocket without thinking, fingers brushing against nothing, then paused. The absence was noticeable, but not heavy. He had left the letter where it belonged. The thought settled in without resistance. Some things were not meant to be carried forever. Beside him, the dog shifted slightly, stretching one front paw forward before resting his head against it. Eyes half closed, but not asleep. Just at ease. Daniel glanced down at him, studying the lines of his face, the steady rise and fall of his chest, the way his ears twitched faintly at distant sounds, but did not hold on to them. "You did your job," Daniel said quietly, the words carried away gently by the breeze. "More than anyone asked you to." The dog did not respond with movement, but there was something in the stillness that followed, something that felt like acknowledgement without the need for gesture. Daniel leaned back slightly, his shoulders relaxing into a posture that no longer felt like it needed to be ready for anything. The field stretched out before them, open and endless, and for the first time in a long while, Daniel did not feel the need to measure distance. He did not need to calculate how far something was, or how long it would take to get there. He just sat. After a while, a small figure appeared at the far edge of the field, a child running after something unseen, laughter carried faintly through the air. Daniel watched without reacting, the scene passing through him without pulling anything loose. Life moving, simple and unguarded. The dog lifted his head slightly, ears flicking toward the sound, then settled again, uninterested in chasing what was not his to follow. Daniel exhaled slowly, a breath that felt complete from beginning to end. When he stood, it was not because he needed to move, but because he chose to. The dog rose with him, stepping into place at his side without command. Together, they turned back toward the road, the path home clear, not because it had been marked, but because they no longer needed to question where it led. The walk back felt shorter, not because the distance had changed, but because something inside Daniel had stopped measuring it. The road curved gently beneath their feet, the same oaks casting their shifting shadows, but now the light seemed steadier, less fractured, as if it had decided where to rest. The dog moved beside him with the same quiet confidence, his steps even, his gaze forward, no longer scanning, no longer searching for anything beyond what was already there. When they reached Cedar Ridge Lane again, the neighborhood carried its usual rhythm, but Daniel noticed how it held together, how each small sound fit into something larger. A screen door closed. A bicycle rolled past with the faint click of spokes. Somewhere, wind chimes stirred, their soft metallic notes rising and fading without urgency. Daniel slowed as they approached the house, his eyes lifting toward the front porch, the open space where he had first stood watching something he did not understand. The gate was closed now, resting naturally in place, not as a barrier, but as part of the line that marked home. He paused just before it, his hand hovering for a moment before resting against the cool metal. The dog stopped beside him, not ahead, not behind, simply aligned. Daniel looked down briefly, then back at the house, the windows catching the afternoon light, the structure no longer feeling borrowed or temporary. "This is where we stay," he said quietly, the words carrying a kind of finality that did not feel forced. The dog's ears flicked once, his body steady, as if the meaning of that statement needed no confirmation. Daniel pushed the gate open and stepped through, the movement smooth, unremarkable, the kind of motion that no longer required thought. The yard felt smaller now, but not confined, just contained, defined. He walked toward the porch, the boards creaking softly under his weight, a familiar sound that no longer echoed. The dog followed, then paused just at the edge of the doorway, not hesitating, but acknowledging the space in the way he now seemed to acknowledge everything. Daniel stepped inside first, then turned slightly, leaving the door open without thinking. The dog crossed the threshold a moment later, his movement fluid, natural, like something that had already decided long before the step was taken. Inside, the house held the same quiet warmth, but it felt fuller now, not with objects or sound, but with presence. Daniel moved to the shelf where he had placed his own dog tags earlier, his fingers brushing lightly against them, the metal still cool, but no longer heavy. He did not pick them up. He did not need to. They were no longer something he carried. They were something that had shaped him, and now rested. Behind him, the dog settled near the center of the room again, lowering himself onto the floor with a soft exhale, his body fully at ease, no tension left in the lines of his posture. Daniel turned and watched him for a moment, the silence between them steady and unbroken. There was no command to give, no task to assign, no role to fill, just a shared space that asked nothing more of either of them. Outside, the wind moved lightly through the yard, brushing the gate just enough to let it shift an inch, then settle again, a quiet reminder that it could open if needed, but did not have to. Daniel walked to the door and closed it gently, the latch catching with a soft, final sound that did not separate him from anything, but grounded him where he stood. He remained there for a moment, hand resting against the wood, eyes closing briefly, not in exhaustion, but in recognition. Then he turned back into the room, stepping forward without hesitation, the space ahead no longer unknown, no longer waiting, just ready. Evening came slowly, stretching long shadows across the walls as the light outside softened into gold, then into something quieter, something that did not demand to be noticed, but stayed anyway. Daniel sat near the window, not watching for anything, not expecting movement, just letting the fading light settle across the room and through him. The house held a different kind of silence now, not empty, not waiting, but full in a way that could not be measured. The dog lay nearby, his body curved into a natural rest, eyes closed, breathing deep and even, as if sleep had finally found him without resistance. Daniel glanced over once, then let his gaze drift back to the window, the reflection faintly showing his own outline layered over the outside world. For a moment, he studied it. The lines of his face, the stillness in his posture, not unchanged, but no longer guarded in the same way. The past had not disappeared. It had not been erased. It had simply been placed somewhere it no longer needed to be carried in every step. He leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees, hands loosely clasped, feeling the quiet settle deeper. There was no need to fill it, no need to move through it, just to let it be. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees, a soft, steady sound that blended with the distant hum of evening life. Lights flickered on in neighboring houses, one by one, small points of warmth appearing against the dimming sky. Somewhere, a door closed. Somewhere, laughter rose and faded. The world continued, not asking him to catch up, just allowing him to be part of it again. Daniel stood after a while, not because he had to, but because stillness had done its work. He moved through the house with a quiet familiarity, pausing briefly at the shelf where his dog tags rested. He touched them once, not to pick them up, not to hold on to them, just to acknowledge their place. Then he stepped away. Some things were not meant to be worn forever. They were meant to be remembered and then set down. The dog stirred as Daniel passed, lifting his head slightly, eyes opening just enough to follow the movement, then settling again when nothing urgent followed. Trust, not the kind built in moments, but the kind that arrived after something had been completed. Daniel walked to the door and opened it, stepping out onto the porch as the last of the daylight slipped below the horizon. The air had cooled, carrying with it the scent of night beginning, a quiet transition that asked for nothing and offered everything. He stood there for a moment, looking out across the yard, the gate visible in the dim light, closed and still, no longer holding a story, just part of the space it belonged to. He did not walk toward it. He did not need to. Instead, he remained where he was, breathing in the evening, letting the quiet settle fully into place. Behind him, the dog rose and stepped onto the porch, coming to rest beside him, not looking outward, not watching the road, just standing there, present. Daniel glanced down, then forward again, the smallest shift of something steadying inside him. There was no voice, no sign, no moment of revelation. Just this. A man, a dog, a house that no longer felt like something borrowed, and a night that did not carry the weight of what had come before. Daniel exhaled slowly, the breath leaving him without resistance, and for the first time in a long while, it did not feel like something was missing. It felt like something had been returned. The night settled fully, wrapping Cedar Ridge Lane in a quiet that no longer felt like something to endure, but something to belong to. The sky stretched wide and clear above, scattered with stars that did not demand attention, but offered it freely to anyone willing to look up. Daniel remained on the porch for a while longer, his hands resting loosely at his sides, his posture no longer held by habit or memory, but by something simpler. Presence. The dog stood beside him, steady and calm, his gaze not fixed on the road, not drawn to the distance, but resting somewhere in between, as if he understood that nothing else needed to arrive. After a while, Daniel stepped forward, the wooden boards beneath his boots giving a soft, familiar creak, and walked down toward the yard one last time. The grass shifted gently beneath his steps, still carrying the warmth of the day, and when he reached the gate, he paused, his hand resting against the metal not as someone holding on to something, but as someone acknowledging where something had once been. He looked down briefly at the ground beyond it, where the earth had been turned and returned, now smooth again, indistinguishable from the rest of the yard. There was no marker, no sign, nothing to point to, and yet it did not feel forgotten. It felt complete. Daniel exhaled slowly, then pushed the gate open just enough to step through, the motion quiet, unforced. He stood on the other side for a moment, looking back at the house, the porch light casting a warm glow across the entryway, a place that no longer felt like a stop along the way, but a place he had arrived at. The dog followed, stepping through the gate without hesitation, coming to stand at Daniel's side once more. There was no pause, no glance behind, just forward. Daniel turned, closing the gate gently behind them, the soft click settling into the night like a final note that did not need to be repeated. They walked a few steps down the road, then stopped, not because there was somewhere else to go, but because there was nowhere else they needed to be. Daniel looked out at the quiet stretch ahead, then up at the sky, the stars steady and distant, unchanged by anything below them. Some things wait, he said softly, the words carried lightly into the air. Not because they are lost, but because they are meant to be found. The dog shifted slightly beside him, his shoulder brushing against Daniel's leg, a small, grounding contact that required no meaning beyond what it was. Daniel nodded once, more to himself than anything else, then turned back toward the house. The path behind them was the same. The yard, the porch, the door, but it no longer held what it once had. It no longer carried something unfinished. As they stepped back through the gate, Daniel did not hesitate. He walked forward, the dog beside him, their steps aligned, steady, unbroken. At the door, he paused only long enough to rest his hand briefly against the frame, then stepped inside, leaving it open for a moment longer before closing it gently behind them. The house settled into stillness again, but it was not empty. It was held. Outside, the gate stood quiet in the night, no longer a place of waiting, just part of a home where nothing else needed to return. And inside, two souls moved through the same space, not bound by what had been, but carried quietly forward by something that had finally found its way home.